Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something that's going to absolutely blow your minds. What if Izuku Midoriya got transported to the One Punch Man universe and ended up in a polyamorous relationship with both Fubuki and Tatsumaki? Now hear me out, because this concept is absolutely broken for so many reasons. First off, you've got Deku with One for All, a quirk that's already insanely overpowered, but now he's in a world with completely different power scaling. We're talking about a universe where Saitama can literally one-punch anything, where Tatsumaki can lift entire cities with her mind, and where Fubuki commands one of the most elite hero groups ever. The power dynamics alone are insane, but here's where it gets even more epic. Imagine the emotional complexity. Tatsumaki, who's been emotionally closed off for years because of her trauma, suddenly meeting someone who doesn't fear her power and actually helps her heal. And Fubuki, always living in her sister's shadow, finding someone who sees her individual worth and leadership abilities. Meanwhile, Deku's bringing his whole inspire hope in everyone energy to a world that's way more cynical than his original universe. So we thought, what if we took this concept and made it a full 12-chapter epic where they don't just fall in love, but actually become interdimensional guardians protecting the multiverse itself? We're talking about dimensional rifts, psychic villains that attack their bond directly, and ultimately them having to fight entities that exist between realities. Plus, they end up having a kid who's genetically connected to all three parents because of their dimensional evolution. Like, how epic is that? If this sounds like the most ambitious crossover fanfic concept you've ever heard, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell, because we're about to deliver something absolutely legendary. Alright, let's dive into this masterpiece. The dimensional energy readings had been fluctuating for weeks, but it wasn't until Dr. Cusino's urgent call that Izuku understood the true implications of what they meant. Standing in the scientist's laboratory alongside Genos, he stared at the complex array of monitoring equipment that had been tracking anomalous energy signatures across the city. "The patterns are unmistakable, Doctor," Cusino explained, pointing to a series of wavelength displays that meant nothing to Izuku but clearly concerned the elderly scientist. "These readings match the dimensional disturbance that occurred when you first arrived in our world." Izuku's heart skipped a beat. I mean there's a possibility, a small one but real nonetheless, that a stable pathway back to your original dimension could be established." Dr. Cusino's expression was grave. However, the window of opportunity would be extremely limited, and the process would likely be irreversible. The weight of those words settled over Izuku like a physical force. For months, he had adapted to this world, built relationships, found love, and created a life he treasured. The pain of losing his original world had gradually been replaced by gratitude for what he'd found. But now, faced with the possibility of return, all those carefully healed wounds split open at once. "How long would I have to decide?" he asked quietly. "Based on the current rate of dimensional flux, perhaps 2 weeks before the energy patterns either stabilize into a permanent gateway or collapse entirely, Doctor." Cusino replied, "I should warn you, however, that attempting to traverse the dimensional barrier could be fatal. We have no way of knowing if human biology can survive the process twice." Genos, who had been silently observing the conversation, spoke up. "Have you informed the others of this development?" "Others?" Dr. Cusino looked confused. "Fubuki and Tatsumaki," Izuku clarified, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "No, I needed to understand the situation first." But even as he said it, Izuku knew he was lying to himself. The truth was that he was terrified of their reaction, terrified of hurting them, and equally terrified of what his own response might be when faced with their pain. The journey back to their shared apartment felt endless. Izuku's mind raced through possibilities, obligations, and emotions he wasn't prepared to handle. His original world needed him, or at least it had when he'd left. All Might, his mother, his classmates at UA. Did they think he was dead? Had they given up searching for him? Or were they still fighting the good fight, one hero short because of his absence? But this world had given him something his original life never could have. A love so profound and complex that it had fundamentally changed who he was as a person. Fubuki and Tatsumaki weren't just romantic partners, they had become essential parts of his identity, his purpose, his understanding of what it meant to be truly happy. He found them in their usual evening configuration, Fubuki reviewing case files while Tatsumaki floated nearby, ostensibly reading but actually keeping protective watch over her sister. The domestic tranquility of the scene made his chest tighten with emotion. "You're late," Fubuki observed without looking up from her work. "Dr. Kusino's meeting ran longer than expected?" "Yes," Izuku replied, then immediately felt guilty for the incomplete truth. "Actually, there's something we need to discuss, something important." Both sisters looked up at his tone, their expressions immediately shifting to concern. Tatsumaki descended to ground level, her psychic field unconsciously expanding to encompass all three of them, a protective gesture that had become instinctive. "What's wrong?" she asked directly. Izuku took a deep breath, knowing that there was no gentle way to deliver this news. "Dr. Kusino has detected dimensional energy patterns similar to what brought me to this world. He believes there might be a way for me to return to my original dimension." The silence that followed was deafening. Fubuki's hand stilled on her paperwork while Tatsumaki's psychic aura flickered with barely contained emotion. "Return," Fubuki repeated slowly as if testing the weight of the word. "As in, go back to your world permanently?" "The process would likely be one way," Izuku confirmed, hating every word he had to speak. "And there's no guarantee I would survive the dimensional crossing." "Then it's not really an option," Tatsumaki said firmly, her voice carrying the authority she used when making tactical decisions. "The risk is too great for an uncertain outcome." "It's not that simple," Izuku replied gently. "My original world, the people there, what about them?" Fubuki asked, her professional composure beginning to crack. "What about the people here? What about us?" The pain in her voice was like a physical blow to Izuku's chest. "You both mean everything to me, but I also have responsibilities, people who depend on me." "People who think you're dead," Tatsumaki interrupted harshly. "People who have moved on with their lives while you've built something real here." "You don't know that," Izuku said, though her words echoed his own fears. "I don't know what happened after I disappeared. Whether they're safe, whether they need help, and you don't know if they're better off without you," Fubuki added quietly. "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give people is allowing them to become who they need to be without us." The observation hit closer to home than Izuku was comfortable admitting. His relationship with his classmates, particularly Bakugo, had always been complicated by his presence. His mother had lived in constant fear for his safety. Even All Might had worried about the burden he was placing on Izuku's shoulders. "This isn't just about them," he admitted finally. "It's about who I was supposed to be, the hero I was meant to become in that world." "And what about the hero you've become in this world?" Tatsumaki asked, her voice softer now but no less intense. "What about the people you've saved here, the lives you've changed? What about us?" Fubuki whispered, the question barely audible. Izuku moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "You two are the best thing that ever happened to me, in any world, in any dimension." But you're still going to leave," Tatsumaki finished, her tone flat and emotionless in the way that meant she was protecting herself from devastating pain. "I don't know," Izuku said honestly. "I need time to think, to figure out what's right." "What's right?" Fubuki repeated, pulling her hands free and standing abruptly. "What's right is staying where you're loved, where you're needed, where you've built a life that matters." "My mother," Izuku began. "Your mother raised a hero," Tatsumaki interrupted. "A hero who saves people, who builds connections, who makes the world better wherever he is. Do you think she would want you to abandon that to chase a ghost of who you used to be?" The words hit Izuku like a physical blow because they contained more truth than he wanted to acknowledge. His mother had always been proud of his heroic spirit, not his specific accomplishments or location. "I need some air," Fubuki said suddenly, moving toward the balcony door. "I can't. I need to think." After she left, Izuku and Tatsumaki sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Tatsumaki spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "You're going to go, aren't you?" "I honestly don't know," Izuku replied. "Part of me feels like I have an obligation to return to fulfill the role I was meant to play in that world. And the other part knows that leaving you and Fubuki would be the most painful thing I've ever done. That it might destroy the best parts of who I've become." Tatsumaki was quiet for a long moment, her psychic aura shimmering with suppressed emotion. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Of course. When Fubuki and I were children, after our parents died, I used to lie awake at night planning our future. I had it all figured out, how I would protect her, how I would make sure she never got hurt, how I would be strong enough for both of us." Her voice grew distant. "But I never planned for happiness. I never imagined that either of us could have something like what we found with you." Izuku felt tears gathering in his eyes. "Tatsumaki, I'm not trying to manipulate you," she continued. "I'm trying to tell you that sometimes the life we planned isn't the life we need. Sometimes the greatest courage is in choosing happiness over obligation. And sometimes," Izuku replied softly, "the greatest courage is in honoring our responsibilities even when it breaks our hearts." They looked at each other across the space between them, both understanding that they were approaching a crossroads that would change everything, regardless of what choice was made. "If you go," Tatsumaki said finally, "promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll make the choice based on what you truly believe is right, not on what you think you owe to people who may not even need what you think you owe them." It was perhaps the most emotionally mature thing he'd ever heard her say, and it made the situation even more complicated rather than clearer. "I promise," he said. That night, sleep was impossible for all three of them. Fubuki had returned from the balcony eventually, but the easy intimacy they usually shared had been replaced by a careful distance that hurt more than anger would have. They lay in their bed, physically close but emotionally miles apart, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. "Izuku," Fubuki's voice cut through the darkness. "If you do decide to go, I need you to know something." "What?" "I won't try to stop you, and I won't hate you for it." Her voice was steady despite the obvious pain beneath it. "I'll hate the situation and I'll hate the choice you have to make, but I won't hate you." "Neither will I," Tatsumaki added quietly. "But I need you to know that if you stay, it has to be because you want to be here. Not because you feel sorry for us or guilty about leaving." The unconditional love in both their voices was almost unbearable. Izuku had spent his entire life surrounded by people who cared about him, but he had never experienced anything like the mature, selfless affection these two women were showing him even in the face of potential abandonment. "I love you both," he whispered into the darkness. "Whatever I decide, that will never change." "We know," Fubuki replied. "That's what makes this so hard." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of emotional complexity and tactical preparation. Despite the personal crisis, they continued their hero work, though their usual seamless coordination was disrupted by the unspoken tension between them. The Hero Association, sensing something was wrong with their most effective S-Class team, began asking questions that none of them were prepared to answer. How could they explain that the foundation of their partnership might be about to dissolve due to dimensional physics and impossible choices? Dr. Cusino's daily reports tracked the growing stability of the dimensional rift. Each update brought them closer to the deadline and made the choice more real, more immediate. "The energy patterns are stabilizing faster than anticipated," Dr. Cusino reported during their final meeting. "If you're going to attempt the crossing, it needs to be within the next 48 hours. Izuku nodded, though his stomach churned at the finality of the timeline. "And if I choose not to go, then the opportunity will be lost, likely permanently. The dimensional barriers between worlds are not easily breached, and this convergence appears to be unique." As they left the laboratory, Fubuki and Tatsumaki flanked Izuku in what had become their standard protective formation. But today, it felt less like protection and more like a last embrace. "So," Fubuki said with forced lightness, 48 hours to decide the rest of our lives." "No pressure," Tatsumaki added dryly. Despite everything, Izuku found himself smiling at their attempt to maintain normalcy. "When you put it like that, it sounds almost manageable." That evening, they did something they had never done before. They talked honestly about what each of their futures might look like if Izuku left. "The Blizzard Group would continue," Fubuki said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "I've built something sustainable that doesn't depend entirely on any one person." "You'd throw yourself into work," Tatsumaki observed, "the same way you did before he arrived, maybe. Or maybe I'd finally understand what it means to have truly lived, even if only for a few months." Fubuki's smile was sad but genuine. "That's not nothing. What about you?" Izuku asked Tatsumaki. She was quiet for a long moment, floating slightly above them as she considered her answer. "I'd go back to being the tornado of terror, I suppose, but I'd also remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself. That knowledge, I think it would make me a better hero even if I was alone again." "You wouldn't be alone," Fubuki said firmly. "Whatever happens, we still have each other." "Yes," Tatsumaki agreed, descending to take her sister's hand. "We do." Watching them together, Izuku was struck by a realization that changed everything. The love between the three of them hadn't diminished the bond between the sisters, it had strengthened it. They had learned to support each other in ways they never had before, to communicate honestly, to trust in each other's strength. If he left, he wouldn't be destroying what they had built together. He would be leaving them with something beautiful and sustainable that they could carry forward, whether he was there or not. "I've made my decision," he said quietly. Both sisters looked at him, their expressions carefully neutral despite the obvious tension in their bodies. "I'm staying," Izuku said, the words feeling both surprising and inevitable as he spoke them. "This is my home now, you are my home." The relief that washed over both sisters was palpable, but it was Tatsumaki who spoke first. "Are you sure? Because if you're staying out of guilt or obligation, I'm staying because I finally understand what home really means," Izuku interrupted gently. "It's not a place or a world or even a set of responsibilities. It's the people who make you feel like the best version of yourself. It's the relationships that help you grow into who you're meant to be. And you think that's here?" Fubuki asked, hope beginning to creep into her voice. "I know it's here," Izuku replied with absolute certainty. "My original world shaped me into someone capable of love and heroism. But this world, both of you, have taught me how to actually live those ideals. How could I abandon that to chase a memory of who I used to be?" What followed was the most cathartic emotional release any of them had experienced. Tears, laughter, desperate embraces, and whispered confessions of fear and relief all mingled together in a chaotic celebration of their continued future together. "So what do we do about the dimensional rift?" Tatsumaki asked practically once they had all composed themselves somewhat. "We make sure it gets properly sealed," Izuku replied. "Dr. Kusino mentioned that the energy patterns could be destabilized safely if we act quickly. I won't leave a dangerous anomaly hanging over this world just because I chose not to use it." "Together?" Fubuki asked. "Together," Izuku confirmed, "the way we do everything else." The next morning, they stood with Dr. Kusino and Genos at the location where the dimensional rift was strongest, an unremarkable alley that had become a nexus point between worlds. The air itself seemed to shimmer with otherworldly energy. "Are you certain about this?" Dr. Kusino asked one final time. "Once we collapse the dimensional barrier, there will be no going back." "I'm certain," Izuku replied, looking at Fubuki and Tatsumaki standing beside him. "This is where I belong." The process of sealing the rift required all three of their abilities working in perfect harmony. Tatsumaki's psychic power provided the raw force needed to compress the dimensional anomaly. Fubuki's precision allowed them to target the exact weak points in the fabric of spacetime. And Izuku's One for All, channeled at exactly the right frequency, provided the catalyst that allowed the rift to collapse safely. As the last traces of dimensional energy faded, Izuku felt a profound sense of finality. The door to his original world was closed forever, but he felt no regret. Only gratitude for the path that had led him to this moment, these people, this life. "So," Tatsumaki said as they walked away from the sealed rift, "what now?" "Now we go home," Izuku replied, taking both sisters' hands in his. "And we build the future we want together." "No more looking back?" Fubuki asked. "No more looking back," Izuku confirmed. "Only forward together." As they made their way through the city streets, none of them noticed the small group of reporters who had witnessed the dimensional sealing from a distance. By evening, the headlines would read, "S-Class heroes prevent dimensional catastrophe," but the real story, the story of choice, love, and the courage to embrace an uncertain future, would remain private, shared only between three people who had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you choose to stay rather than go. The next chapter of their lives was about to begin, and for the first time since arriving in this world, Izuku faced it with no reservations, no divided loyalties, and no regrets. He was exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people he belonged with. Home wasn't a place you returned to, it was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with the people brave enough to build it alongside you. The weeks following Izuku's decision to permanently seal the dimensional rift had brought an unexpected sense of peace to their lives. But that tranquility was shattered when Dr. Kusino's emergency communication system activated at 2 a.m., filling their apartment with urgent alerts. "All S-Class heroes respond immediately," came the automated message. "Multiple dimensional anomalies detected across 7 city districts. Unidentified entities emerging from unstable rifts. This is not a drill." Izuku was already moving before the message finished, his hero instincts overriding any lingering drowsiness. Beside him, both Fubuki and Tatsumaki were equally alert, their powers unconsciously activating in response to the perceived threat. "But we sealed the rift," Fubuki said, confusion evident in her voice as she pulled on her hero costume. "How can there be new dimensional anomalies? Maybe our sealing process had unintended consequences," Izuku replied grimly, adjusting his gear. "Or maybe there were other weak points we didn't know about." Tatsumaki floated near the ceiling, her psychic field already expanded and probing for threats. "The energy signatures feel wrong, different from what we dealt with before." Their flight to the first reported anomaly site took them across a city that looked like a war zone. Strange creatures that defied classification roamed the streets, some resembling the monsters they were familiar with, but others appearing to be twisted amalgamations of different realities entirely. "Those aren't from our world," Izuku observed as they surveyed the chaos from above. "But they're not from mine either, they're something else entirely." The first rift they encountered was a jagged tear in reality itself, approximately 10 feet wide and crackling with energy that made their skin crawl. Through it, they could see glimpses of what appeared to be a pocket dimension, a space between worlds that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. "Something's controlling this," Tatsumaki said, her voice tight with concentration as she held back the creatures trying to pour through the rift. "This isn't random dimensional instability." "Then we need to find the source," Fubuki replied, coordinating the evacuation of nearby civilians through her communication network. "But first, we need to contain these breaches." What followed was unlike any battle they had previously fought. The creatures emerging from the rifts seemed to adapt not just to individual fighting styles, but to the very nature of their reality. Attacks that should have been devastating were absorbed or redirected. Strategies that had worked in previous battles proved useless. "They're learning from our world," Izuku realized as he watched a creature that had been stunned by his punch suddenly develop armor specifically designed to counter One for All's energy signature. "Every attack we make teaches them how to defend against it." "Then we need to stop teaching them," Tatsumaki said grimly, her psychic power shifting from direct attacks to environmental manipulation. Instead of striking the creatures directly, she began altering the battlefield itself, collapsing buildings to create barriers, redirecting water mains to create obstacles, using the city's infrastructure as weapons. Fubuki quickly adapted to this new strategy, using her psychic abilities to coordinate complex environmental attacks while maintaining communication with evacuation teams. "Izuku, we need your analytical abilities more than your strength right now. Can you identify patterns in how they're adapting?" The request forced Izuku to shift his entire approach to the battle. Instead of engaging directly, he began observing, cataloging, and predicting the creature's evolutionary responses. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. "They're not just adapting to our attacks," he reported through their communication system. "They're adapting to our world's physics, our reality's rules. The longer they stay here, the more integrated they become with our dimension." "Integration for what purpose?" Tatsumaki asked, using her power to seal one of the smaller rifts through sheer force of will. Before Izuku could answer, a new voice cut through their communications, cold, calculating, and utterly alien. "Integration for conquest, of course." The source of the voice became apparent as a figure emerged from the largest rift downtown. It was humanoid but wrong in ways that hurt to perceive directly. Its form seemed to shift between dimensions, never quite solid in their reality but undeniably present. "I am the Void Architect," the entity continued, its voice carrying across the city through dimensional manipulation. "And this reality is perfect for my purposes." "What purposes?" Izuku called out, using One for All to leap between buildings and approach the entity while his partners maintained their containment efforts. "Every dimension has its own rules, its own physics, its own limitations," the Void Architect explained, seeming genuinely pleased to have an audience. "But the barriers between dimensions are not absolute. With sufficient knowledge and power, one can create spaces between realities, pocket dimensions that follow rules of one's own design." The space-time quirk user, Fubuki realized suddenly, her voice reaching them through their communication network. "When he died during the training exercise, his unstable power didn't just create a rift, it created a beacon." "Precisely," the Void Architect confirmed. "His death throes called out across the dimensional void, and I answered. I've been studying your reality ever since, learning its rules so that I might improve upon them." Tatsumaki's response was immediate and devastating. Her psychic power lashed out at the entity with enough force to level a city block. But the attack passed harmlessly through the Void Architect, who simply smiled at her effort. Physical force is meaningless against a being who exists primarily between dimensions, it explained patiently. But please, continue. Every attack teaches me more about your world's limitations. If conventional attacks don't work, then we need unconventional solutions, Izuku muttered to himself, his analytical mind racing through possibilities. Did you say something? The Void Architect asked, its attention focusing on Izuku with uncomfortable intensity. Ah, you're the one who triggered the beacon in the first place. How deliciously ironic that you should be here for the culmination of that accident. What culmination? Izuku demanded, even as he gestured for his partners to regroup with him. The merging, of course. Your reality is stable, well-ordered, rich with life and energy. Perfect raw material for expanding my pocket dimension until it encompasses this entire universe. Everyone and everything will continue to exist, but under rules that I design rather than the chaotic natural laws that currently govern your existence. The magnitude of the threat was staggering. Not just conquest, but complete dimensional restructuring that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence for every living being in their reality. We can't let that happen, Fubuki said as she joined them, her voice carrying absolute determination despite the hopelessness of their situation. Of course you can't, the Void Architect agreed cheerfully. But you also can't stop it with the tools available to you. I exist beyond your reality's rules while you are bound by them. The outcome is inevitable. That's when Izuku had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. What if we weren't bound by our reality's rules? He said quietly to his partners. What do you mean? Tatsumaki asked, though something in his tone made her focus entirely on his words. The entity exists between dimensions, right? It's not fully committed to any single reality. But what if we could join it in that space between worlds, not to merge realities, but to fight it on equal terms? That would require us to partially detach from our own dimensional anchor, Fubuki realized, understanding dawning in her eyes. The psychic resonance between the three of us might be strong enough to maintain our coherence while we shift dimensional states, but it would be incredibly dangerous, Tatsumaki finished. If we lose our connection to each other or to our reality, we could be scattered across infinite dimensions. Or, Izuku said with growing conviction, our bond could be exactly what allows us to navigate dimensional space safely. Our connection transcends individual existence. It's something the three of us created together that's stronger than any of us alone. The Void Architect had been observing their quiet discussion with growing interest. Fascinating. You're actually considering dimensional translation. I applaud your creativity, though I should warn you that the process is quite lethal for beings anchored to a single reality. Maybe, Izuku replied, looking at both sisters with absolute trust and love. But we're not beings anchored to a single reality anymore. We're something new. What followed required a level of trust and coordination that went beyond anything they had previously achieved. Using their psychic abilities as a bridge, Fubuki and Tatsumaki began the process of gradually shifting their dimensional resonance. Izuku served as their anchor point, using One for All's connection to the power that had originally brought him between dimensions as a stabilizing force. The sensation was indescribable, like being dissolved and reconstituted at the quantum level while maintaining conscious awareness throughout the process. Reality became fluid around them, and suddenly they could perceive the true scope of what they were facing. The Void Architect wasn't just one entity, it was a collection of intelligences from collapsed dimensions, beings who had watched their own realities die and had decided that controlled existence was preferable to natural chaos. Its pocket dimension wasn't empty space, but rather a graveyard of absorbed realities, each one improved according to the collective will of the entities that comprised the Void Architect. Remarkable, the collective voice said as they fully translated into dimensional space. You've actually managed to maintain coherent existence outside your native reality. I'm genuinely impressed. Impressed enough to reconsider your plans? Fubuki asked, though she already knew the answer. Impressed enough to offer you a choice, the Void Architect replied. Join us willingly and you can help design the new rules for your reality. Continue to resist and you'll be absorbed along with everything else, but without any input into what your existence becomes. There's a third option, Izuku said, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Oh, and what might that be? We prove that your controlled existence isn't actually superior to natural chaos, that the relationships and connections that grow organically are stronger than anything that can be artificially imposed. The Void Architect's collective laughter was like the sound of dying stars. And how do you propose to prove such a subjective proposition? By beating you, Tatsumaki said simply, her psychic power beginning to resonate with the dimensional space around them in ways that should have been impossible. What followed was a battle fought across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. In the space between realities, conventional physics held no meaning, but the connections between the three heroes proved to be something far more fundamental than physical law. Izuku's determination, refined through years of heroic struggle, became a force that could reshape dimensional space itself. Fubuki's strategic brilliance allowed her to navigate the complex geometries of interdimensional combat. And Tatsumaki's raw power, no longer constrained by the limitations of physical reality, erupted with devastating effect. But their greatest weapon was the bond between them, a connection so strong that it created its own dimensional anchor point, allowing them to remain coherent and united even as they fought across infinite realities. The Void Architect, for all its power and experience, had never encountered anything like what they represented. Its collective consciousness was based on absorbed realities and imposed order, while their bond was something that had grown organically from choice, trust, and love. "This is impossible," the collective voice said, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. "Your connection should be breaking down under dimensional stress. Individual consciousness cannot maintain coherence across multiple realities." "You're right," Izuku replied, even as he used One for All to punch a hole through dimensional space itself. "Individual consciousness can't, but we're not individuals anymore. We're something new," Fubuki added, her psychic abilities weaving their anchor point into an offensive weapon that struck at the very foundation of the Void Architect's pocket dimension. "Something you can't understand because you've never experienced genuine connection," Tatsumaki finished, her power joining with her partners to create a resonance cascade that began unraveling the absorbed realities within the pocket dimension. The Void Architect's scream echoed across multiple dimensions as its carefully constructed prison began to collapse. The absorbed realities it had claimed to be improving began reasserting their natural laws, their chaotic vitality overwhelming the artificial order that had been imposed upon them. "You're destroying everything," the collective voice protested. "Without imposed order, these realities will return to their natural chaos." "Good," Izuku said firmly. "Chaos means possibility. It means growth, change, the chance to become something better through choice rather than compulsion." As the Void Architect's pocket dimension collapsed, the heroes found themselves being pulled back toward their own reality. The dimensional rifts that had been tearing their world apart began to seal themselves as the artificial breach between worlds closed. They materialized back in their own dimension with a jarring impact that sent shockwaves through several city blocks. But they were alive, coherent, and still connected to each other in ways that went beyond the physical. "Is it over?" Fubuki asked, looking around at the city that was already beginning to return to normal as the interdimensional creatures faded from existence. "The immediate threat is over," Izuku confirmed, using his enhanced senses to scan for any remaining anomalies. "But we've changed too. I can still feel the dimensional space we touched." "We all can," Tatsumaki agreed, her psychic abilities now carrying traces of interdimensional awareness that hadn't been there before. "We're not the same as we were." "No," Izuku agreed, looking at both sisters with profound love and gratitude. "We're something new, something that can exist across realities and still maintain our connection to each other. Something that can protect not just our world but the stability of dimensional space itself," Fubuki realized. As they made their way through the recovering city, accepting the thanks of citizens and the bewildered gratitude of the Hero Association, they began to understand that their role had evolved far beyond conventional heroism. They had become guardians of dimensional integrity itself, protectors not just of their reality, but of the natural order that allowed realities to exist and evolve according to their own laws rather than imposed artificial structure. "So," Tatsumaki said as they finally made it home to their apartment, "interdimensional threats, that's new." "Everything about us is new," Izuku replied with a tired but genuine smile. "But we'll figure it out the same way we've figured out everything else. Together," Fubuki finished, settling into their familiar evening configuration with a deep sense of satisfaction. Outside their window, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that it was now protected by three people whose love had literally transcended the boundaries of reality itself. The next phase of their extraordinary journey was about to begin, but for now, they were content to simply be together, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them across infinite dimensions, they would face them as they faced everything else, as a bond that had proven stronger than the laws of physics themselves. The pocket dimension that housed the Void Architect's remaining essence was unlike anything the three heroes had ever encountered. Reality here was fluid, constantly shifting between different physical laws as fragments of absorbed worlds struggled to reassert their independence. Gravity pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, time flowed in eddies and currents rather than a steady stream, and the very air seemed to whisper with the voices of countless displaced souls. "Stay close," Izuku instructed, his voice barely audible over the dimensional static that filled the space. "Our connection is the only thing anchoring us to coherent existence here." Fubuki reached out with her psychic abilities, trying to map the chaotic geometry of their surroundings. "The entity is deeper in toward what might be the center of this space, but the path keeps changing. Because it's afraid," Tatsumaki observed, her own psychic field extending to encompass her partners in a protective bubble. "For the first time, it's actually afraid of us." The Void Architect's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once, distorted by the unstable dimensional medium. "Afraid, I am beyond such crude emotions. I am merely recalculating. Your interference has introduced variables I did not anticipate." "Variables like genuine connection," Izuku replied, using controlled bursts of one for all to navigate through a section where gravity had inverted itself. "Like the strength that comes from choosing to trust each other." "Sentiment," the entity dismissed, though something in its tone suggested uncertainty. "Temporary chemical reactions that evolution will eventually eliminate as inefficient." As they moved deeper into the pocket dimension, the challenges became increasingly personal. The space began manifesting psychic attacks designed to exploit their individual traumas and insecurities. Izuku found himself facing phantoms of his former classmates, their faces twisted with accusation and disappointment. "You abandoned us," the phantom of Bakugo snarled. "We needed you, and you chose strangers over your real friends." The attack was sophisticated, designed to trigger his deepest fears of inadequacy and abandonment. But instead of destabilizing him, it only strengthened his resolve. "My real friends would want me to be happy," Izuku said firmly, walking through the phantom without flinching. "And these aren't strangers anymore. They're my family." Fubuki faced her own psychological assault, visions of herself alone again, watching Izuku and Tatsumaki together while she remained forever on the outside. "You were never really part of it," the false visions whispered. "You're just the bridge between them, disposable." But the fear that might once have paralyzed her now felt hollow and unconvincing. "I know what I mean to them," she said with quiet confidence. "I know what they mean to me. Your illusions can't touch what's real." Tatsumaki's trial was perhaps the most vicious. She was shown endless variations of losing her sister and Izuku, to death, to betrayal, to the simple passage of time. The phantom pain of isolation crashed over her like a tidal wave. For a moment, her psychic barriers wavered, and the old terror of abandonment nearly overwhelmed her. But then she felt it, the steady presence of her partner's love, not just for her but flowing through her, connecting all three of them in an unbreakable network of mutual support. "I'm not alone anymore," she whispered, and her power erupted with new intensity, fueled not by fear but by absolute certainty of her place in their bond. The Void Architect's attacks faltered as each hero passed through their psychological trials, not only intact but stronger than before. "Impossible," the entity muttered. "Individual consciousness should fragment under such targeted pressure. Your separate identities should be dissolving." "They would be," Izuku explained as the three of them reached what appeared to be the center of the pocket dimension, "if we were still separate individuals." "But we're not." The core of the space was a vast chamber where the Void Architect's true form writhed in constant flux, part energy, part matter, part pure consciousness drawn from 1,000 absorbed realities. It was beautiful and terrible, a testament to power without purpose. "You don't understand what you're destroying," the entity said, its voice now carrying notes of desperation. "I have preserved entire civilizations within myself. If you unmake me, all those worlds, all those lives will be lost forever." "You haven't preserved them," Fubuki replied, her psychic senses penetrating the entity's deceptions. "You've trapped them." They're not living, they're specimens in your collection. But they exist, the Void Architect protested. Under my control, they are safe from the chaos that destroyed their original realities. Existence without choice isn't life, Tatsumaki said firmly. It's just storage. The final battle began not with violence, but with something far more profound. Instead of attacking the Void Architect directly, the three heroes did something that defied all tactical logic. They opened themselves completely to each other. The psychic barriers that individuals maintain even in the closest relationships dissolved entirely. Izuku's memories of loss and determination, Fubuki's struggles with self-worth and leadership, Tatsumaki's fears of abandonment and need for control, all of it became shared experience, flowing between them without judgment or reservation. But more than just sharing their pain, they shared their growth. Izuku's evolving understanding of what it meant to be a hero in a complex world. Fubuki's journey from isolation to genuine intimacy. Tatsumaki's transformation from solitary protector to cherished partner. The result was a resonance that transcended individual existence. Not loss of self, but expansion of self, each person becoming more than they could ever be alone while remaining fundamentally who they were. Their combined psychic signature began to affect the pocket dimension itself. The trapped realities within the Void Architect's form began to respond to the hero's resonance, remembering what it felt like to exist according to natural law rather than imposed order. Stop, the entity begged as its carefully constructed prison began to unravel. You don't understand the consequences. Without my guidance, these realities will return to their original chaos. They'll destroy themselves again. Maybe, Izuku acknowledged, his voice now carrying harmonics from all three heroes simultaneously. But they'll do it as themselves, making their own choices, following their own paths. That's what makes existence meaningful, Fubuki added, her consciousness intertwined with her partner's in perfect harmony. Not the guarantee of survival, but the freedom to grow, change, and choose your own destiny. Even if that destiny includes failure, Tatsumaki concluded, her love for her family extending to encompass the abstract concept of freedom itself. The Void Architect's scream of despair echoed across dimensions as its form began to dissolve. But instead of destruction, what followed was liberation. The absorbed realities began separating from the entity's consciousness, each one reasserting its own natural laws and returning to its own dimensional space. Some of these realities were indeed chaotic, potentially dangerous to themselves and others. But others bloomed with renewed life and possibility, their inhabitants free to make their own mistakes and achievements. The heroes watched as dimension after dimension separated from the collapsing pocket space, each one carrying a small resonance of the freedom they had fought to preserve. It's beautiful, Fubuki whispered as they observed the birth of new possibilities across multiple realities. It's terrifying, Tatsumaki admitted, watching realities that might destroy themselves in their newfound freedom. It's right, Izuku concluded, feeling the absolute certainty that came from their synchronized consciousness. This is what existence is supposed to be. As the last of the absorbed realities freed themselves, the Void Architect's individual components began to separate as well. The consciousnesses that had formed the collective entity, refugees from dead realities who had chosen control over freedom, suddenly found themselves facing the same choice they had tried to deny others. What do we do now? One of them asked, its voice small and lost without the collective structure. Whatever you choose to do, Izuku replied gently. You can try to rebuild what you've lost or create something entirely new or simply rest. The choice is yours. Some of the component consciousnesses chose to fade away, finally accepting the death of their original realities. Others began the difficult work of creating new dimensional spaces where they could explore existence without trying to control everything around them. And a few, inspired by what they had witnessed, chose to become guardians themselves, not of imposed order, but of the freedom that allowed realities to flourish or fail according to their own nature. As the pocket dimension collapsed entirely, the three heroes found themselves being pulled back toward their own reality. But the journey back was different than their initial translation. They remained synchronized, their consciousness partially merged even as they returned to individual physical forms. They materialized in the same alley where they had first sealed the dimensional rift, but everything had changed. They could feel the dimensional matrix of their reality, could sense the health and stability of the barriers between worlds. They had become something unprecedented, interdimensional guardians whose very existence helped maintain the natural order of the multiverse. "Are we still human?" Fubuki asked, examining her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "We're still us," Izuku assured her, though he understood her question. Their consciousness now operated on multiple levels simultaneously, individual, paired, and triadic, with awareness extending across dimensional boundaries. "We're human plus something else," Tatsumaki concluded, her psychic abilities now carrying traces of interdimensional energy that would never fully fade. Something new? Dr. Cusino and Genos were waiting for them when they emerged from the alley, their scientific instruments detecting the profound changes that had occurred during the battle. "The dimensional instabilities have completely resolved," Dr. Cusino reported, though his expression was puzzled. "But the energy readings I'm getting from the three of you are unprecedented." "We've evolved," Izuku explained simply. "The battle changed us into something that can protect the dimensional integrity of reality itself." "Is that dangerous?" Genos asked with his typical directness. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Tatsumaki replied, unconsciously echoing their often-repeated philosophy. "But we have each other to keep us grounded." As they made their way home through the city streets, the heroes began to understand the full scope of what they had become. They could sense dimensional weak points that might someday threaten their reality. They could feel the natural flow of interdimensional energy that kept the barriers between worlds stable. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that they would spend the rest of their lives protecting not just their own world, but the fundamental right of all realities to exist according to their own natural laws. "So," Fubuki said as they settled into their apartment, "interdimensional guardians, that's quite a career advancement." "The pay is probably terrible," Izuku observed with a tired smile. "But the company is excellent," Tatsumaki added, allowing herself to float down and join them in their usual evening configuration. As they held each other close, their synchronized consciousness provided a constant reassurance that they were exactly where they belonged, with exactly the people they belonged with. The multiverse was vast and often chaotic, but it was also full of infinite possibility, including the possibility that three people from different backgrounds could find each other across dimensional barriers and create something entirely new. Outside their window, the city continued its nightly rhythm, unaware that it was now protected by guardians whose love had literally rewritten the rules of interdimensional physics. And in countless other realities across the multiverse, similar stories of connection and growth were unfolding, each one unique, each one precious, each one free to follow its own path toward whatever destiny it might choose. The heroes had learned the most profound truth of existence, that genuine love doesn't seek to control or preserve, but to nurture and free. And in learning that truth, they had become something that could protect that freedom for all realities in all dimensions for all time. Their greatest adventure was just beginning, but they would face it as they faced everything else, together, synchronized, and absolutely unbreakable in their bond with each other and their commitment to protecting the beautiful chaos of natural existence. 6 months had passed since the Void Architect's defeat, and the world had settled into a new rhythm, one that included the quiet presence of 3 interdimensional guardians who had become as essential to global stability as they were to each other's happiness. The Hero Association headquarters had undergone significant renovations to accommodate their unique team structure. What had once been individual offices and briefing rooms had been redesigned into collaborative spaces that reflected their synchronized working style. Their official designation had evolved from S-Class Team to something entirely new, Dimensional Security Division. The energy readings from the Antarctic Research Station are showing minor fluctuations, Fubuki reported during their morning briefing, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her one of the most respected tactical coordinators in the association. "Nothing immediately threatening, but worth monitoring." Izuku studied the data display, his enhanced dimensional awareness allowing him to interpret patterns that would have been meaningless to conventional heroes. "It's probably just natural dimensional tide movement. The barriers between realities flex and shift constantly. It's when they stop moving that we need to worry." "Still," Tatsumaki added, floating near the ceiling in her preferred observation position, "I'll do a flyover this afternoon. Better to check on a false alarm than miss a real threat." The easy coordination between them had become second nature, their conversation flowing with the kind of seamless efficiency that could only come from minds that had learned to work in perfect harmony while maintaining their individual perspectives. Dr. Cusino entered their briefing room carrying a tablet full of technical specifications and wearing the expression of a scientist who had discovered something fascinating. I have the final analysis of your physiological changes, he announced without preamble. The results are unprecedented. Good unprecedented or concerning unprecedented? Izuku asked, gesturing for the elderly scientist to join them at their circular conference table, another design choice that emphasized equality over hierarchy. Remarkable unprecedented, Dr. Cusino replied, activating a holographic display that showed complex energy pattern analyses. Your individual cellular structures have been enhanced with what I can only describe as dimensional resonance markers. You're still completely human, but you're also more. The display showed 3 figures whose energy signatures were distinct yet interconnected, with flowing streams of light that connected them in ways that defied conventional understanding of human biology. More how? Fubuki asked, leaning forward to study the technical readouts. Your telepathic connection operates across dimensional boundaries, Dr. Cusino explained. If one of you were somehow transported to another reality, the other 2 would still be able to sense your location and emotional state. Your bond has become a literal anchor point in the dimensional matrix. Tatsumaki descended from her floating position to examine the data more closely. Is that why we've been sensing dimensional disturbances before your instruments detect them? Exactly. You've become early warning systems for interdimensional threats, but more than that, your synchronized consciousness appears to have a stabilizing effect on local dimensional space. Areas where you spend significant time show increased barrier integrity. The implications were staggering. They weren't just guardians who could respond to dimensional threats, their very presence helped prevent such threats from occurring in the first place. So our apartment building is probably the most dimensionally stable location on the planet, Izuku observed with amusement. Actually, yes, Dr. Cusino confirmed seriously. The dimensional readings around your residence are remarkably stable. Your neighbors are living in one of the safest locations in the multiverse. Later that afternoon, they found themselves in their new favorite location, a rooftop garden they had created atop the Hero Association building. It was larger and more elaborate than their original apartment garden, with space for all 3 of them to pursue their individual interests while remaining close to each other. Izuku was working on a new combat analysis, trying to develop training protocols that could help other heroes recognize early signs of dimensional instability. Fubuki was coordinating with international hero organizations, sharing their expertise with teams around the world. Tatsumaki was gardening. The sight of the legendary tornado of terror carefully tending to flowering plants still amused Izuku, though he had learned better than to comment on it directly. Tatsumaki had discovered that the precise control required for nurturing delicate life forms was excellent practice for the surgical precision her evolved powers now demanded. The team from New Tokyo wants to establish a dimensional monitoring station, Fubuki reported, looking up from her communication tablet. They're requesting one of us to consult on the technical requirements. I'll go, Tatsumaki volunteered, not looking up from her careful pruning of a rose bush. I've been wanting to see how their psychic research division operates anyway. Alone? Izuku asked, not with concern but with simple curiosity. Tatsumaki paused in her gardening and looked at both of her partners. 6 months ago, the idea of traveling anywhere without them would have triggered anxiety about separation and loss of control. Now, it simply felt like a normal part of their individual growth within their shared bond. Alone, she confirmed with a slight smile. I'll only be gone for 2 days and you'll be able to sense my emotional state the entire time. Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder, doesn't it? The easy confidence in her voice was perhaps the strongest indicator of how much she had healed and grown. The woman who had once been terrified of emotional vulnerability now trusted so completely in their bond that temporary physical separation held no fear for her. Just promise to call if anything interesting happens, Fubuki said, already turning back to her coordination work. I want to hear about their research techniques. That evening, they received an unexpected visitor. Saitama appeared on their balcony not through any dramatic entrance, but simply by climbing the fire escape with his characteristic casual approach to extraordinary situations. Hey, he said, raising a hand in greeting as they looked up from their dinner. Mind if I join you? I was in the neighborhood. Of course, Izuku replied, automatically setting out another place at their table. How have you been, Saitama-san? Bored mostly, Saitama admitted, settling into the offered chair. Things have been pretty quiet since you 3 started doing your dimensional guardian thing. Fewer weird monsters, fewer city-threatening crises. Is that a complaint? Tatsumaki asked with amusement. Not exactly, it's just different. I used to be the one dealing with the really big threats, and now you guys handle them before they become big enough for me to notice. There was something wistful in his tone that made all three of them pay closer attention. The legendary One-Punch Man, whose overwhelming strength had made him feel isolated from the rest of humanity, was experiencing a different kind of isolation, the loneliness of no longer being needed in the same way. You know, Fubuki said thoughtfully, we've been talking about establishing a formal training program for heroes who want to learn dimensional threat recognition. We could use someone with your experience to help design the practical combat scenarios. You'd want my help? Saitama asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Your combat instincts are extraordinary, Izuku explained. You can sense when something is genuinely dangerous versus just impressive looking. That's exactly the kind of judgment we need to teach other heroes. Plus, Tatsumaki added, you're one of the few people who can spar with us at full power without getting seriously injured. We need training partners who can keep up with our evolved abilities. Something shifted in Saitama's expression, a spark of interest that had been missing for months. That actually sounds kind of fun. When do we start? The conversation that followed stretched late into the evening, covering everything from training methodologies to the philosophical implications of power and responsibility. Saitama's unique perspective, that of someone whose overwhelming strength had initially isolated him but who had learned to find meaning in connection with others, provided insights that none of them had considered. You know what's funny? Saitama mused as the night wound down. I used to think that having unlimited power would solve all my problems. Turns out, the real solution was finding people who understood what it meant to have that kind of responsibility. Understanding is important, Izuku agreed. But so is choosing how to use that understanding. You could have become bitter or destructive. Instead, you chose to protect people, even when it didn't give you the satisfaction you were looking for. Same with you three, Saitama observed. You could probably reshape reality if you wanted to. Instead, you choose to maintain it, to let other people make their own choices even when those choices might be mistakes. The insight was more profound than perhaps Saitama realized. The temptation to use their evolved abilities to fix the world's problems was always present, but they had learned from the Void Architect's mistakes. True strength meant protecting freedom, not imposing solutions. Later that night, as they settled into their shared bed, now expanded to accommodate their synchronized sleeping patterns, Fubuki voiced something that had been on all their minds. We're building something permanent here, aren't we? She said quietly. Not just our relationship, but our role in the world, our place in the larger structure of reality. It feels that way, Izuku agreed, his hand finding hers in the darkness. When I first arrived in this world, I thought I was just trying to survive until I could find a way home. Now this is home, Tatsumaki finished softly. Not just the place we live, but the life we've built together. The purpose we've discovered. Are you happy with that? Fubuki asked. With the idea that this might be our forever? The question hung in the air for a moment, not because any of them doubted the answer, but because the weight of forever when applied to beings who existed partially outside normal dimensional space was more significant than it would be for ordinary humans. I can't imagine wanting anything else, Izuku said finally. Not just being with both of you, but being part of something larger than ourselves, protecting the freedom that allows love like ours to exist. I used to be afraid of forever, Tatsumaki admitted. It felt like a trap, a limitation, but forever with you too, it feels like infinite possibility instead of infinite repetition. Forever sounds perfect, Fubuki concluded with quiet satisfaction. Especially if it means we get to keep growing together, keep discovering new aspects of what we can become. As they drifted toward sleep, their synchronized consciousness provided a constant, gentle reassurance of their shared contentment. In the months since their transformation, they had learned to navigate the complex balance between individual identity and collective experience, between human emotion and cosmic responsibility. The next morning brought news that would test their growing confidence in their role as dimensional guardians. Reports were coming in from multiple realities, not threats, but requests for help from civilizations that had somehow learned of their existence and wanted guidance in dealing with their own dimensional stability issues. Apparently, Dr. Cusino explained during their emergency briefing, word has spread through certain interdimensional communities that there exists a team of guardians who protect dimensional integrity without imposing their will on the realities they protect. How many requests are we talking about? Tatsumaki asked, already mentally calculating the logistics of interdimensional travel. 17 so far, from realities ranging from slightly advanced versions of our own world to civilizations that exist as pure energy consciousness. The scope of what they were being asked to take on was staggering. They had become not just guardians of their own reality, but potential consultants to the multiverse itself. "We can't help everyone," Fubuki said practically. "We're only 3 people, and our primary responsibility is to our own reality. But we can't ignore civilizations that are genuinely asking for help," Izuku countered. "If we have knowledge that could prevent dimensional catastrophes, don't we have an obligation to share it?" "Maybe," Tatsumaki suggested, "we don't have to choose between helping others and protecting our own world. Maybe the solution is to help others learn to protect themselves." What emerged from their discussion was the framework for something unprecedented. An interdimensional network of civilizations committed to maintaining dimensional stability through cooperation rather than control. Not an empire or a federation, but a loose alliance of realities that shared information and mutual aid while respecting each other's sovereignty. "We could call it the Dimensional Stability Accord," Fubuki suggested, already sketching out potential organizational structures. "A voluntary association of realities that want to maintain their independence while contributing to multiverse-wide stability. With us serving as founding coordinators rather than rulers," Izuku added. "We help establish the framework, then step back and let each reality manage its own participation." "It's ambitious," Tatsumaki observed. "It's also exactly the kind of project that could occupy us for the rest of our extended lifespans." They looked at each other across their planning table, each recognizing the magnitude of what they were contemplating. They had gone from being heroes who protected a single city to guardians who might help stabilize the entire multiverse. "Are we ready for that level of responsibility?" Fubuki asked. "Probably not," Izuku admitted with a slight smile, "but that's never stopped us before. Besides," Tatsumaki added, rising from her chair with renewed energy, "we'll figure it out the same way we figured out everything else." Together, all 3 said simultaneously, their synchronized consciousness turning the word into something approaching a sacred vow. As they began the work of drafting their response to the interdimensional requests, none of them could have predicted how their small act of love and courage in choosing each other would ripple outward to touch realities they had never imagined. But that was the nature of genuine connection. It created possibilities that extended far beyond the individuals involved, inspiring others to reach for their own versions of extraordinary happiness and purpose. The future stretched before them, vast and full of challenges they couldn't yet envision. But they would meet those challenges as they met everything else, hand in hand, heart to heart, with love as their foundation and freedom as their highest principle. Their greatest adventure was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The dimensional energy readings had been unusual for weeks, not threatening, but different in a way that made all 3 heroes instinctively uneasy. Unlike the chaotic disruptions they had learned to recognize and counter, these fluctuations felt almost intentional, purposeful, as if something was studying them rather than simply trying to invade their reality. "The patterns are too regular to be natural," Izuku observed during their morning analysis session, his enhanced dimensional awareness picking up subtleties that even their most advanced instruments couldn't detect. "Whatever's causing these fluctuations is intelligent and patient." Fubuki traced the energy patterns on their holographic display, her strategic mind working through possibilities. "Patient enough to observe us for weeks without making a move. That suggests either extreme caution or extreme confidence. Or both," Tatsumaki added grimly, floating above their workstation with her arms crossed. "Something powerful enough to be confident, but smart enough to study its opponents before acting." Their speculation was interrupted by an alert from the Hero Association's emergency network. Reports were flooding in from across the city, not of monsters or villains, but of people experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams that left them emotionally drained upon waking. "Psychic attack?" Fubuki asked, immediately shifting into tactical mode. "More sophisticated than that," Izuku replied, studying the pattern of reports. "The affected areas form a perfect circle around our apartment building. We're not just the target, we're the center of whatever this is." The realization sent a chill through all 3 of them. In the months since their transformation, they had faced various threats to dimensional stability, but this was the first time something had specifically targeted them personally. "Show yourself," Tatsumaki called out to the empty air, her psychic field expanding to its maximum range. "If you want our attention, you have it." The response came not as a voice or a physical manifestation, but as a shift in reality itself. The air in their briefing room began to shimmer, and suddenly they could see, overlaid on their normal perception like a double-exposed photograph, another version of their space. One where they sat in the same positions but wore expressions of bitter suspicion and barely contained hostility toward each other. "Fascinating," a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Even when shown the truth of what you really are, you resist accepting it." The voice was unlike anything they had encountered before, not alien like the Void Architect, but disturbingly familiar. It carried echoes of their own voices, their own intonations, as if it were speaking with words borrowed from their own minds. "What are you?" Izuku demanded, instinctively moving closer to his partners. "I am the Emotion Weaver," the entity replied, and suddenly the double vision became more intense. Now they could see dozens of overlapping versions of themselves, some where they were strangers, some where they were enemies, some where they had never met at all. "I am the force that shapes the connections between conscious beings. I am what makes love possible, and what makes it vulnerable." The overlapping visions began to shift and change, showing them increasingly disturbing alternatives. Versions where Izuku had chosen to return to his original world, leaving both sisters heartbroken and bitter. Realities where Tatsumaki's protective instincts had driven her to violence against Izuku. Timelines where Fubuki's insecurities had poisoned her relationship with both partners. "These are lies," Fubuki said firmly, though her voice carried a slight tremor that hadn't been there moments before. "Are they?" the Emotion Weaver asked with amusement. "Or are they simply possibilities that exist in the quantum foam of your relationship? Every connection contains the seeds of its own destruction. Every act of love creates an equal potential for betrayal." The visions became more specific, more personal. They watched themselves arguing bitterly about dimensional security policies. They saw Tatsumaki abandoning them during a crisis, claiming she had never needed anyone. They witnessed Izuku confessing that he had never truly loved either sister, that he had simply been grateful for their acceptance in a strange world. "Stop," Tatsumaki commanded, her psychic power lashing out at the source of the visions, but her attacks passed harmlessly through empty air, striking nothing. "I exist in the space between thoughts and feelings," the entity explained patiently. "I am the doubt that whispers in the quiet moments, the fear that grows in the darkness of uncertainty. You cannot fight me with conventional force because I am not separate from you, I am part of you." The room around them began to shift, walls stretching and warping until they found themselves in a vast space that looked like a twisted version of their shared apartment. Everything was familiar but wrong, furniture in the right places but with sharp edges that suggested hostility rather than comfort, photographs of happy moments that now showed them with cold, distant expressions. "This is what your relationship really is," the Emotion Weaver continued, its voice now seeming to come from the walls themselves. "A carefully constructed illusion built on mutual need rather than genuine love. The interdimensional crisis simply gave you an excuse to cling to each other out of fear and convenience." "That's not true," Izuku said, but even as he spoke, he felt a cold tendril of doubt creeping into his mind. Had he really chosen this life because he loved Fubuki and Tatsumaki, or simply because the alternative was facing his isolation in a strange world alone? "Isn't it?" the entity pressed. "Fubuki, you've always been desperate for validation, for someone to see you as more than just Tatsumaki's lesser sister. Of course you would convince yourself that the first man to show you attention was your true love." Fubuki's face went pale as the words hit disturbingly close to insecurities she thought she had overcome. Around them, the twisted apartment shifted to show scenes of her past failures, her desperate attempts to prove herself worthy of respect and affection. "And Tatsumaki," the Emotion Weaver continued, its attention turning to the floating figure whose psychic aura was now flickering with barely contained emotion. "You've spent so many years isolated by your power that when someone finally wasn't afraid of you, you mistook gratitude for love. You've never learned the difference between being needed and being wanted." The visions surrounding Tatsumaki showed her worst fears made manifest, scenes where Izuku and Fubuki discussed her behind her back, calling her damaged, difficult, more trouble than she was worth. In these false memories, their acceptance of her had been pity rather than genuine affection. As for you, Izuku, the entity said, its voice now carrying a cruel edge, you've always defined yourself by your usefulness to others. When you lost your original world, you had to find new people to save, new problems to solve. You've convinced yourself that you love these women, but really you just need them to need you. The psychic assault was more devastating than any physical attack they had ever faced. Unlike the Void Architect's attempts at control or the random monsters they regularly fought, the Emotion Weaver's weapon was doubt itself, the insidious poison that could destroy relationships from within. The twisted apartment around them began to fragment, showing dozens of alternative scenarios where their relationship had collapsed under various pressures. They watched themselves drift apart due to jealousy, break up over disagreements about their responsibilities, or simply grow bored with each other as the novelty of their unusual arrangement wore off. Every relationship ends, the Emotion Weaver whispered seductively. Every connection eventually fails when the illusion of compatibility meets the reality of individual selfishness. I'm simply showing you the inevitable conclusion so you can spare yourselves the prolonged pain of pretending otherwise. For a moment, just a moment, all three heroes wavered. The doubts being fed to them felt so reasonable, so logical. Relationships did fail, people did grow apart, love did sometimes mask neediness, insecurity, and fear of abandonment. But then Izuku did something that caught both the entity and his partners off guard. He laughed, not bitterly or sarcastically, but with genuine amusement, as if the Emotion Weaver had just told him an absurd joke. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice carrying none of the doubt that had been creeping in moments before. "You're absolutely right about some things. I was lonely and lost when I arrived in this world. Fubuki did have insecurity issues. Tatsumaki was isolated by her power. Then you admit," the entity began. "I admit that we're all flawed people who found each other at points in our lives when we needed connection," Izuku continued, his smile growing wider. "But that doesn't make our love false, it makes it real." The twisted visions around them flickered as his certainty disrupted the entity's psychological attack. "Real love isn't about perfect people finding each other," Fubuki said, understanding dawning in her voice as she picked up on Izuku's insight. "It's about imperfect people choosing to grow together despite their flaws." "And we have grown," Tatsumaki added, her psychic field stabilizing as her own confidence returned. "We're not the same people who first came together months ago. We've helped each other become better versions of ourselves." The Emotion Weaver's attack faltered as the three heroes began to speak openly about their relationship's actual foundation, not the idealized romance the entity was trying to deconstruct, but the complex, difficult, and ultimately triumphant reality of three damaged people learning to love and trust each other. "Yes, I was desperate for validation," Fubuki said, addressing the entity's accusations directly. "But through loving both of you, I learned the difference between validation and genuine worth. You helped me discover my own value. Yes, I was isolated and grateful for acceptance," Tatsumaki admitted, "but you both taught me that I deserve love not because of what I can do for others, but because of who I am as a person. And yes, I did need to feel useful," Izuku concluded. "But you both showed me that my worth isn't dependent on solving everyone's problems. Sometimes the most heroic thing I can do is simply be present and honest." The twisted apartment around them began to dissolve as their honest communication disrupted the Emotion Weaver's power source. The entity fed on doubt, insecurity, and the kind of emotional isolation that prevented people from sharing their fears with those they loved. But when they spoke openly about their vulnerabilities and how they had overcome them together, there was nothing left for it to manipulate. "This is impossible," the entity whispered, its voice now carrying notes of confusion and fear. "All relationships are built on illusion and mutual deception. When that foundation crumbles, the connection must fail." "Our foundation isn't illusion," Izuku replied firmly. "It's the choice to keep choosing each other every day despite our flaws and fears and the fact that love is sometimes difficult work. It's the decision to trust each other with our worst moments as well as our best ones," Fubuki added. "It's the understanding that perfect love doesn't exist, but real love, love that accepts imperfection and chooses to grow anyway, is stronger than any fantasy," Tatsumaki concluded. The Emotion Weaver's scream of frustration echoed across dimensions as its carefully constructed psychological assault completely unraveled. Without doubt and isolation to feed on, it found itself facing something it had never encountered before, a relationship that was actually strengthened by acknowledging its own imperfections. You cannot survive this, the entity protested desperately. Every connection has breaking points. Every love has limits. I will find yours. Maybe you will, Izuku said calmly. Maybe someday we'll face a challenge that's too much for us. Maybe our love will change or evolve in ways we can't predict. But if that happens, it won't be because we were lying to ourselves about what we mean to each other. It will be because we're human beings who are doing our best to love each other honestly in a complex and often difficult universe, Fubuki added. And that's not a weakness to be exploited, Tatsumaki concluded. It's a strength that grows stronger every time we choose it. The space around them had completely returned to their normal briefing room, but now it felt more real, more solid than before. Their shared honesty had actually strengthened their dimensional anchor point, making their connection even more stable than it had been before the attack. The Emotion Weaver's presence faded like smoke, its final words carrying a note of bewildered defeat. I don't understand. This defies everything I know about the nature of conscious connection. Then maybe, Izuku suggested gently, you need to learn new things about love. After the entity's departure, the three heroes sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, processing what they had just experienced and overcome. That was terrifying, Fubuki admitted finally, not because of what it showed us, but because for a moment, I almost believed it. The scariest lies are the ones that contain just enough truth to seem reasonable, Tatsumaki observed. We do have flaws. Our relationship did begin under unusual circumstances, but that doesn't invalidate what we've built together. If anything, Izuku said thoughtfully, facing those doubts honestly has made me more certain than ever that what we have is real. Perfect relationships might be more fragile than imperfect ones that have learned to weather challenges together. Dr. Cusino's voice crackled through their communication system, interrupting their reflection. Are you three all right? Our instruments detected massive psychic fluctuations in your area, but they've stabilized now. We're better than all right, Tatsumaki replied, a note of satisfaction in her voice. We just passed a test we didn't even know we were taking. That evening, as they settled into their usual domestic routine, all three noticed subtle changes in how they interacted with each other. The Emotion Weaver's attack had forced them to examine and articulate the foundation of their relationship more clearly than they ever had before. You know what's interesting? Fubuki observed as they prepared dinner together. I feel closer to both of you now than I did before the attack. Having to defend our love made me understand it better. Same here, Izuku agreed, passing her ingredients with the automatic coordination they had developed over months of shared meals. It's like we had to prove to ourselves that what we have is worth fighting for. And we did prove it, Tatsumaki added, floating nearby while she used her psychic abilities to set the table with characteristic precision. Not with power or strategy, but with honesty and the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. As they sat down to eat, Izuku found himself marveling at how natural this felt. Three people who had chosen each other despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, who had faced cosmic threats and dimensional anomalies and psychological attacks, and who had emerged stronger from each challenge. I love you both, he said suddenly, the words carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. We love you too, Fubuki replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. All of us, Tatsumaki added, descending to join them at table level rather than floating above. In all our imperfect, complicated, absolutely real glory, the Emotion Weaver had been wrong about one crucial thing. Their love wasn't built on illusion or mutual need. It was built on choice, the daily decision to see each other clearly, flaws and all, and to choose connection over isolation, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. And that choice, renewed every day through small acts of kindness and large acts of courage, had proven stronger than any force that sought to tear them apart. Outside their window, the city continued its nightly rhythm, unaware that three of its protectors had just redefined what it meant to love someone completely and honestly in an uncertain world. Their next challenge would come eventually, it always did, but they would meet it as they met everything else, together, with eyes wide open to both the beauty and the difficulty of genuine love. And they would win not because their relationship was perfect, but because it was real. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their expanded apartment, casting golden light across a space that had evolved far beyond its original configuration. What had once been a simple living area had become the heart of something unprecedented, a home that served simultaneously as a sanctuary for three extraordinary individuals and the unofficial headquarters for the most successful hero team in recorded history. Izuku stood at the kitchen counter, preparing breakfast for 5 instead of 3. The addition of Saitama as a regular breakfast guest had happened gradually, born from their collaborative training programs and his growing integration into their extended family structure. Genos had joined them more recently, drawn by his sensei's presence and his own fascination with their unique dynamic. The dimensional stability reports from the Antarctic station came in overnight, Fubuki announced, reviewing data on her tablet while simultaneously coordinating with hero teams across 7 time zones. Her ability to manage multiple complex operations had evolved into something approaching artistry. Complete stability for the past 90 days. Whatever adjustments we made to the monitoring array are working perfectly. Good, Tatsumaki replied from her position near the ceiling, where she was tending to an elaborate aerial garden that defied several laws of physics. I was getting tired of flying down there every few weeks to recalibrate the sensors. The easy domesticity of the scene belied the profound changes that had occurred not just in their personal lives, but in the world around them. The Dimensional Stability Accord had grown from a theoretical framework into a functioning interdimensional alliance encompassing 47 different realities. Their apartment building had become an unofficial embassy for beings from across the multiverse who sought guidance on maintaining dimensional integrity. Any word from the delegation from reality designation Sigma-7? Izuku asked, plating breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had made feeding his extended family into a daily meditation. They've agreed to the non-interference protocols, Fubuki reported with satisfaction. That makes unanimous approval for the latest amendments to the accord. We now have universal agreement on protecting developing realities from premature contact with interdimensional technology. Unanimous approval across 47 realities, Saitama observed as he climbed through the balcony door, having arrived via his characteristic method of simply jumping from building to building. That's got to be some kind of record for diplomatic achievement. It helps that we're not trying to rule anyone, Tatsumaki noted, descending to join them at their expanded dining table. It's easier to get agreement when you're asking civilizations to commit to principles they already believe in rather than demanding they submit to external authority. Genos materialized moments later, his mechanical precision making him perpetually punctual for their morning gatherings. Dr. Cusino has completed his analysis of the energy readings from the Accord's newest member reality. Their dimensional barriers show remarkable stability despite their reality being only 3,000 years old. The conversation flowed with the easy coordination of people who had learned to function as an extended family unit. What had begun as a romantic relationship between 3 people had gradually expanded into something more complex and inclusive, not diluting their original bond, but rather creating space for other meaningful connections within their life structure. Speaking of new realities, Fubuki said, a particular tone in her voice that immediately caught her partner's attention, there's something we need to discuss. Something personal. Izuku and Tatsumaki both focused on her completely, their enhanced connection allowing them to sense the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her emotional state. The medical evaluation I requested came back with some interesting results, Fubuki continued, setting down her tablet and looking at both partners with an expression that was somehow shy and radiant simultaneously. It seems that our dimensional evolution has had some unexpected physiological effects. What kind of effects? Tatsumaki asked, though something in her sister's manner was already suggesting possibilities that made her psychic field flutter with anticipation. The kind, Fubuki said with a growing smile, that apparently make it possible for someone with my enhanced cellular structure to support new life even under circumstances that would normally be complicated. The silence that followed was profound as both Izuku and Tatsumaki processed the implications of her words. Are you saying? Izuku began. I'm saying that I'm pregnant, Fubuki confirmed, her voice carrying joy and wonder in equal measure. And according to Dr. Cusino's analysis, the child will carry genetic markers from all 3 of us, despite the biological impossibility of such a thing under normal circumstances. The explosion of emotion that followed was unlike anything their enhanced connection had ever carried. Joy, awe, terror, excitement, and profound love crashed together in a wave that actually caused minor fluctuations in the local dimensional field. Tatsumaki was the first to move, floating down to embrace her sister with a gentleness that her psychic field made feather-soft. A baby, she whispered, wonder evident in her voice. We're going to have a baby. We are, Fubuki confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face as Izuku joined their embrace, his own emotional state threatening to activate one for all purely from the intensity of his feelings. "This is impossible," he said, though his tone was one of amazed gratitude rather than disbelief. "But then again, everything about us has been impossible from the beginning." "Impossible and wonderful," Tatsumaki agreed, her usual emotional restraint completely abandoned in favor of pure, unguarded joy. Saitama and Genos, witnessing this intimate family moment, exchanged glances and began to quietly excuse themselves from what was clearly a private celebration. "Stay," Fubuki called to them, wiping away tears while maintaining her radiant smile. "Your family too, this affects all of us." The inclusion of their extended family in the announcement felt natural and right. Over the months, their core relationship had become the center of a larger chosen family structure that included friends, colleagues, and allies who had become integral parts of their lives. "A baby," Saitama repeated, his typically understated manner unable to completely hide his pleasure at the news. "That's really great, congratulations. The implications for dimensional genetics are fascinating," Genos added, his analytical mind already working through the scientific ramifications. "A child carrying the genetic heritage of three-dimensional guardians could have unprecedented abilities. Or they could be completely normal," Izuku said firmly, his protective instincts already activating. "And that would be perfectly wonderful too. We're not raising a weapon or a tool, we're raising a person who happens to have extraordinary parents. Extraordinary parents who happen to be interdimensional guardians with a tendency to attract cosmic-level threats," Tatsumaki observed with dry humor, though her tone carried underlying concerns about the challenges of raising a child in their unique circumstances. "Then we'll adapt," Fubuki said with quiet confidence, "the same way we've adapted to everything else. Together, with love and patience, and the understanding that some challenges are worth facing." The conversation that followed covered everything from practical considerations about child-proofing an apartment that regularly hosted beings from other dimensions, to the deeper questions about how to raise a child who would grow up as part of humanity's first interdimensional family. "We'll need to expand the apartment," Tatsumaki noted, already mentally redesigning their living space to accommodate a growing family. "And establish security protocols that don't make our home feel like a fortress," Izuku added, his strategic mind working through the balance between protection and normalcy. "Most importantly," Fubuki said, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach, "we need to remember that whatever abilities our child may or may not inherit, they deserve the chance to choose their own path in life." The morning stretched into afternoon as they discussed, planned, and celebrated the profound change that was coming to their lives. By evening, word had somehow spread through the Hero Association's network, and their apartment was filled with congratulations from colleagues, friends, and allies from across multiple realities. Dr. Cusino arrived with a portable medical scanner and an expression of scientific fascination that was both endearing and slightly overwhelming. "The cellular readings are unprecedented," he announced after completing his examination of Fubuki. "The child appears to be developing normally in all respects, but with genetic markers that suggest enhanced dimensional awareness and possibly limited psychic abilities." "Limited how?" Tatsumaki asked, her protective instincts making her want precise information about her future niece or nephew. "Limited in that they appear to be designed for harmony rather than power," Dr. Cusino explained. "If my readings are correct, this child will have the ability to sense and stabilize dimensional disturbances, but not to manipulate them aggressively. More of a natural anchor point than a weapon." "Perfect," Izuku said with deep satisfaction. "They'll be able to understand our work without being burdened by expectations to follow in our footsteps." As the evening wound down and their guests departed, the three soon-to-be parents found themselves alone with the magnitude of what was approaching. "Are we ready for this?" Fubuki asked, though her tone suggested the question was rhetorical. "Probably not," Tatsumaki admitted with characteristic honesty. "But I don't think anyone is ever completely ready to become a parent. We have advantages most parents don't," Izuku pointed out. "We have each other, we have an extended family of people who care about us, and we have the kind of resources that come with being interdimensional guardians. We also have disadvantages most parents don't," Fubuki countered with gentle humor. "Like the fact that our work occasionally involves battles across multiple realities with entities that want to reshape the fundamental nature of existence." "Then we'll have to be very good at work-life balance," Tatsumaki observed, causing both partners to laugh at the understatement. That night, as they settled into their shared bed with the awareness that this familiar ritual would soon include a crib nearby, all three found themselves marveling at how their understanding of love had continued to evolve. "You know what's amazing?" Fubuki said softly in the darkness. "When we first came together, I thought love was about finding someone who completed you. Now I understand that it's about finding people who help you become complete in yourself. And now we get to help someone else discover what it means to be complete," Izuku added, his hand resting gently on Fubuki's stomach where their child was growing. "The three of us plus one," Tatsumaki murmured, her psychic field extending to encompass all of them in a gentle, protective embrace. "I can't wait to meet them." 1 year later. The sound of delighted baby laughter filled the apartment as small Akira, named for the bright future they represented, demonstrated an early ability to make flowers bloom with tiny bursts of dimensional energy. At 10 months old, they were already showing signs of the unique abilities Dr. Cusino had predicted, though in ways that were more whimsical than powerful. "They're going to be a handful," Tatsumaki observed fondly, using her psychic abilities to gently guide their child away from the interdimensional communication array that they seemed determined to investigate. "They're going to be amazing," Fubuki corrected, though her tone carried the same fond exasperation that all parents develop when dealing with a particularly curious toddler. Izuku emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle and wearing an expression of bemused exhaustion that had become his default look since Akira's birth. "I just got off a communication with the Sigma-7 delegation. Apparently, interdimensional parent support groups are now being established across 17 realities. We've accidentally started a multiverse-wide movement." The past year had brought changes none of them could have anticipated. Becoming parents had transformed not just their personal lives, but their approach to their work as dimensional guardians. They had developed new protocols for threat response that ensured at least one parent was always available to care for Akira. They had established the first interdimensional childcare cooperative, where beings from various realities took turns watching each other's offspring during crisis responses. Most surprisingly, they had discovered that parenting had actually enhanced their abilities as guardians. The fierce protectiveness that came with having a child had given them new insight into why civilizations fought so hard to maintain their independence and protect their own ways of life. The quarterly reports from the Accord members show continued stability across all member realities, Fubuki noted, bouncing Akira gently while reviewing her daily briefings. "Zero dimensional incursions, zero unauthorized interdimensional travel attempts, and increasing cooperation on scientific research initiatives." "Good," Tatsumaki said, settling cross-legged on the floor where she could better interact with their child at eye level. "Maybe Akira will grow up in a multiverse where interdimensional war is just a historical curiosity." "That would be nice," Izuku agreed, settling beside them with the easy coordination they had perfected over months of tag-team parenting. "Though knowing our luck, they'll probably invent entirely new types of cosmic threats for us to deal with." Akira looked up at their parents with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths far beyond their age, then clapped their tiny hands together and giggled as a small shower of flower petals materialized from thin air. "Show off," Tatsumaki said affectionately, generating her own small light display that made Akira squeal with delight. As the afternoon progressed into evening, their apartment filled with the usual collection of friends, colleagues, and interdimensional visitors who had become part of their extended family. Saitama arrived with groceries and stories from his latest adventures in Hero Work. Genos brought technical reports and an impressive collection of baby-safe toys he had engineered himself. Dr. Cusino stopped by with Akira's monthly developmental assessment and increasingly amazed observations about their unique physiology. "The child continues to exceed all theoretical predictions," the elderly scientist reported with unconcealed delight. "Their dimensional abilities appear to be growing more sophisticated, but always in ways that promote harmony and stability rather than destruction." "They're going to be a healer," Fubuki said with maternal pride, watching as Akira's presence seemed to calm a small dimensional fluctuation that had been flickering near their communication array. "A builder rather than a fighter, like their parents," Tatsumaki observed. "We learned that the greatest strength isn't the power to destroy threats, but the wisdom to help others find their own solutions." As their guests departed and they settled into their evening routine, Izuku found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From his dimensional displacement and desperate arrival in this world, through the complex evolution of their relationship, To their transformation into interdimensional guardians and now parents, every step had seemed impossible until it became inevitable. "Any regrets?" he asked his partners as they put Akira down in the crib that occupied the space of honor in their bedroom. "About what?" Fubuki asked, though she was already smiling at what she knew would be his answer. "About any of it. The complications, the responsibilities, the fact that our lives are probably going to be permanently chaotic and definitely not what any of us originally planned. I regret that it took a dimensional accident to bring us together," Tatsumaki said thoughtfully. "But I don't regret anything that happened after we found each other. I regret that it took me so long to understand what home really meant," Fubuki added. "But I don't regret the journey that taught me. I regret that we can't share this with the people from my original world," Izuku concluded. "But I don't regret choosing to build something new instead of trying to reclaim something that was already gone." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their child sleep with the deep peace that comes to those who are absolutely secure in their place in the world. Akira's presence had added a new dimension to their relationship, not replacing what they had built together, but expanding it to encompass possibilities they had never imagined. "So what's next?" Fubuki asked quietly. "We've become interdimensional guardians, established the most successful diplomatic alliance in multiverse history, and raised a child who might grow up to surpass all of us. What else is there?" "Everything," Izuku replied with quiet satisfaction. "Tomorrow, next week, next year, there will always be new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to grow and learn and become better than we were. Together," Tatsumaki added, the word carrying all the weight of their shared commitment. "Together," Fubuki agreed, reaching out to take both their hands. "Together," Izuku concluded, feeling the familiar warmth of their synchronized connection and the new joy of knowing that connection would now extend to the next generation. Outside their window, the city continued its nightly rhythm, unaware that in one apartment, three people who had found each other across dimensional barriers were quietly revolutionizing what it meant to love completely, to build something lasting, and to face an uncertain future with absolute confidence in their ability to handle whatever came next. The future stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities they couldn't yet imagine. But they would meet those possibilities as they met everything else, hand in hand, heart to heart, with love as their foundation and freedom as their highest principle. Their greatest adventure was far from over. In truth, with Akira's arrival, it felt like it was just beginning all over again, with new wonders to discover and new dreams to chase across the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. And in the quiet moments before sleep, as three heroes turned parents listened to the gentle breathing of their child and felt the steady pulse of their eternal bond, they knew with absolute certainty that they had built something that would endure across dimensions, across time, across any challenge the multiverse might offer. They had built forever, and forever was just getting started. The end. And there you have it, Izuku's complete journey from a lost dimensional traveler to becoming part of an unbreakable trio that literally saves the multiverse through the power of love. We watched him grow from someone trying to get home to someone who chose his new family, saw Fubuki and Tatsumaki heal from their trauma together, and witnessed all three of them evolve into something beyond human while staying true to their hearts. Drop a like if this story hit you in the feels, and let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was. Was it the first kiss scene, the dimensional battle, or maybe that ending with baby Akira? I personally lost it when they synchronized their consciousness to fight the Void Architect. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic crossover content, and drop your suggestions for what insane scenarios you want to see next. I'm always looking for concepts that'll break the internet. Alright guys, that's a wrap on this dimensional love story. Thanks for sticking with me through it all. Peace out.